Thank you very much. When I was given the topic of today's session, the whole day, humans for better or worse, I thought I might try and take an approach that takes in some part of the non-human universe. So I'm really going to try and give you a perspective from the human, but also maybe a little bit from the forest, because I'm a director of a forest research institute in the university. I think the place I wanted to start was with urbanisation. So most of us in the UK live in urban spaces, maybe not quite as dense as the one that you can see here, but nevertheless in urban spaces. And as of a few years ago, the majority of people on the planet live in urban places. But these urban jungles, as exciting and vibrant and productive as they are, have only come about because of humankind's use of a resource which was laid down many, many millions of years ago by real woody jungles. So plants do this amazing thing. They recreate them, or they create themselves out of sunlight and fresh air, apparently. So the miracle of photosynthesis converts carbon dioxide into plant matter. And some of that plant matter, when it grows in boggy places, gets laid down as peat, and then geology happens, and some of that peat turns into coal. So we end up with these reservoirs of carbon under the ground, which originated as organic material, and which we discovered are an absolutely phenomenally dense source of energy. So we started exploiting that energy. And an inevitable consequence of exploiting that energy is, through burning fossil fuel, is that we put carbon dioxide, originally taken by plant matter, into the coal and peat, back into the atmosphere. So we short circuit a geological process very, very rapidly. And I want to show you what the effect of that is on the carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere. So this little video clip shows you atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations through time. And the measurements are at different latitudes. So latitude is the x-axis that you can see, and the x-axis is set up to be equilaria. What you can see is there is this inexorable increase in carbon dioxide. This particular record starts at a time when I was first going through my school exams, in fact. So when I was a lad, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was about 330 parts per million, ppm, or 330 molecules of carbon dioxide per million molecules of air. That's what we're talking about. And as I've gone through my adult life, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has gone up. I don't think I've been solely responsible for that, but I'm sure I've played my part. But what you can see on that graph is that in the temperate regions, in the northern hemisphere, we see these very big excursions, these positive excursions, which are to do with us all producing carbon dioxide through use of fossil fuel. But we also see these decreases in the temperate regions, in the mid-latitudes, and that's to do with the forests doing their job and pulling down carbon dioxide into living matter. But they still can't completely absorb all the carbon dioxide that we're putting into the planet. So by now, we live in a planet that has more than 400 parts per million of CO2 in it. If we go back in time, before I was a lad, to the start of the Industrial Revolution, to the beginning of the 19th century, which is a time I just want to point out to you because the trees I'm going to show you later on, the oak trees I'm going to show you later on, they were seedlings at about that time, in the mid-19th century. And they were experiencing about 280 parts per million of carbon dioxide when they were beginning to grow. So they've already seen a massive change in the atmospheric composition of that primary substance that they use to convert to build themselves. And thank you to all the various groups who've done all the fantastic analytical chemistry that allows us to have those, the video of the one I've just shown you. So we are currently in a situation that the Earth has not seen in terms of its atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration for at least 800,000 years. But that's not where it's going to stop, because we are not stopping our use of fossil fuel. So we will go beyond this 400 parts per million, possibly well beyond, but almost certainly we will go to 550 parts per million by the middle of this century. So that's the kind of future, high carbon dioxide future, that we're looking at. So just to reiterate that not all the carbon dioxide that we burn through the use of fossil fuel ends up in the atmosphere. Otherwise, we would have an even more significant problem with global warming than we have, because it's only the CO2 in the atmosphere that gives us that global warming effect. So forests have been and will continue, we hope, to be solar-powered hoovers for some part of the CO2 that we are putting out through the burning of fossil fuels. And just to give you a sense of what that, the scale of that, here's one statistic, that temperate forests, so forests in the kind of place that we're at, well, not in the middle of a city, but in these middle latitudes that we're in now, they draw down, as a total, all the temperate forests around the world draw down about as much extra carbon dioxide, though this is on top of what they're drawing down kind of as a matter of course, about as much extra carbon dioxide as all the EU, including the UK, produce annually. So it's a really significant effect that forests are having. And they have that through this kind of, well, at least this is my cartoon version of how they do this, by having a carbon economy, a carbon budget. So forests bring in carbon into themselves through the process of photosynthesis, and then store it as biomass. Then the plants themselves and everything that feeds off the plants, all the entire food web, starts to turn that biomass back into carbon dioxide through a process called respiration, which we're all doing now, and which results in the carbon dioxide in this room being much greater now than it was at the beginning of the day when none of us had been breathing in it all day. So the question we want to ask ourselves is, will the forests continue to draw down this carbon into and lock it up in the forests at the same rate that it is currently doing, that the forests are currently doing, or will potentially that rate increase? Because after all, plants really like carbon dioxide, so why should it not get even, should there not be even more drawdown into the forests? Or might there be less? Now, to understand that question, or to make any headway with that question, there are lots of things you can do. There's lots of things you can do in a lab, lots of things you can do in a greenhouse, but finally, to get to the bottom of it, you have to ask the forest. So you have to go to a forest and do your experimentation in the forest, rather than expecting the forest to come to you and tell you what the answer is. And that's what we've done. So out in Staffordshire, we've built a facility. It's called a Free Air Carbon Enrichment Facility, or FACE. And what that does is it adds carbon dioxide, it mixes it into the air, and then pushes that air gently out into some patches of mature oak woodland. And then, because we're scientists and we want to make a good job of measuring what the response is, we have 3 more patches which just get fresh air blown at them. And then we have another 3 patches which you can't see on this aerial photograph because they're sort of huddled in, sort of hidden in the mass of trees, which don't have all the metallic infrastructure. So we need that level of control in order to see quite subtle responses from the forest. And what we're doing is we're adding 150 parts per million of CO2. So we're taking the forest forward to the middle of this century. This is what it looks like from ground level, and you get a prize if you can spot the PhD student in the middle of the picture. When Radio 4 came to talk to us about this, Roger Harben thought that he was walking on into the set of a forest scene from Star Wars, so he coined the phrase SciFi Forest, and I think that's kind of quite a good way of thinking about this. So if we want to understand how the forest is responding, we have to make measurements and more measurements and more measurements of all kinds, all parts of that carbon budget. And here are some photographs of various pieces of kit that we have to do that. We've only been going now for 2 growing seasons. We're just about to go into this 3rd growing season, and we're going to continue with this extra carbon dioxide until at least 2026. And of course, we need to do that. We need to do this experiment for a long time because the forest could take quite a long time to respond. But in fact, it's responded very promptly. And so the numbers that you can see on this version of the cartoon show you some of the early changes that we've seen in the forest. Now, we don't know whether these changes are going to be maintained. They may just die away, and in fact, they might change sign. But at the moment, this mature English woodland is accumulating carbon and holding it in the forest. And that's really important because globally, as a species, we have our carbon accounting to do now, and it is incredibly important that we get on with it and do it quickly for reasons which I'll just try and explain briefly. This graph is from a recent intergovernmental panel report which was charged with finding trajectories of our human civilization into the future that keep the global warming on the planet below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And they came up with various scenarios. This is just one. But the scenario basically says the more fossil fuel that you burn, that's the grey bit here, the more that you burn and the longer that you burn it for, the more that you have to find a way of taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And the only thing we have currently that does that is our forests. Forests are the only thing we've got that will do this with any kind of efficiency. I mean, of course, there are other ways you can do it industrially, but they're not yet available at scale. Now, there's lots we could say about this graph, and I haven't got time to go into it, but so I just want to draw your attention to how big that yellow wedge is. And if my arithmetic stands up, then that amount of carbon dioxide being removed from the atmosphere every year, locked up into the forest, what they would do is take, the idea is you grow your forest, you cut it down, you burn the wood, but you don't allow that carbon dioxide to go back into the atmosphere. Instead, you trap it in the chimney and you stick it underground or under the ocean somewhere where it can't be released. So that's why it's a carbon removal technology. And we need a lot of it, potentially. This much, 1 billion hectares of land under intensive wood production. That's the area equivalent to 500 times the country of Wales, or every square inch of the USA, an area equivalent to every square inch of the USA, under intensive wood fuel production. The forests are growing fantastic. Finally, the human race have decided that we're useful for something. But this is a really double-edged sword for forests. Because when we've, as a human species, when we've got one-tracked in our thinking about forests, we have tended to make things go quite wrong. So monocultural blankets of trees, in this case for food, but in other cases for timber, have left those landscapes very vulnerable and very prone to disease. Instead, I would just like to leave you with the opinion, I guess I'm not going to claim that it's really anything more than that forests are at their best for them, but also at their most useful for us when they are diverse and complicated and a bit messy, and I think that actually makes them quite beautiful. Thank you.